All right, we're going to dive into the story of a river that didn't just carve a path through a continent, it literally built an empire from the ground up. This is the incredible story of the Nile.
So let's start with a puzzle, a real head-scratcher. We all think of deserts as these empty, lifeless places, right? So how on earth did one of the driest regions on the planet give rise to the phenomenal civilization of ancient Egypt?
Well, the answer isn't something, it's more like a force of nature, something the ancient Egyptians saw as a living, breathing entity. They had a name for it, the gift of the Nile.
To really get what this gift is all about, you first have to understand the sheer scale we're talking about. This isn't just any river, It's a lifeline stretching across a massive desert.
Okay, get this. We're talking 4,132 miles. That is the longest river in the world. To put that in perspective for you, if you stretched it across the entire United States from coast to coast, you'd still have over 1,200 miles of river left over. It's this enormous artery, just pumping life right through the heart of the desert.
And it's really this perfect trifecta that made it all possible. You've got water to drink, obviously. Then you've got these incredibly fertile plains for growing food. And on top of all that, it acts as a natural superhighway for trade and communication. I mean, these weren't just nice-to-haves. They were the absolute, non-negotiable foundations for building a complex society.
But here's the kicker. It wasn't just that the river was there. It was all about its behavior, this predictable, life-giving rhythm, a cycle that became the actual engine driving Egyptian civilization forward.
And it all boils down to simple geography. See, the Nile has two main sources, way up in the high-altitude lakes of Central and Eastern Africa. Now, because these sources are so high up, we're talking over 3,700 feet, the river does something really weird for a major river. It flows downhill from south to north and eventually empties right into the Mediterranean Sea.
So this unique setup created this perfect, almost magical cycle. Every single year, the rainy seasons way up at the sources would cause the river to swell, leading to a predictable flood all the way down in Egypt. And when those floodwaters pulled back, they left behind this incredible gift, a thick layer of rich, black silt carried all the way from the Ethiopian highlands. This meant the Egyptians could literally plan their entire year, their whole civilization really, around this one reliable annual event. Talk about a gift.
So, with a stable food supply basically guaranteed, people could finally stop worrying about just surviving day to day. They could build permanent cities, people could become artisans, priests, soldiers, they could organize. This surplus of food didn't just make them stable, it freed up a huge workforce, a workforce that could be put to work building, well, a civilization.
And man, did that civilization last. Just look at this timeline. You see these huge blocks of time, the old, middle, and new kingdoms? These were the golden ages, periods of strength and unity. But see those gaps in between? Those weren't just blank spots on the calendar. Historians call them intermediate periods. Basically, these were times of chaos, political turmoil, invasions, when that central power, the stability that the Nile provided, just fell apart for a while.
So with all this stability and power, how did they show it off to the world? Well, nothing screams power more than their legacies in stone, their Great Pyramids. And you gotta understand, these weren't just cool-looking buildings. They had two very important jobs. First, they were sacred tombs, right? Meant to help the pharaohs get to the afterlife. But they were also giant billboards, a huge political statement you could see for miles around. They basically broadcasted the pharaoh's immense power and his control over all those resources that the Nile's gift made possible.
I mean, the biggest one, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, was originally a mind-boggling 481 feet tall. For almost 4,000 years, it was the tallest man-made structure on the entire planet. Erosion has shaved a little off the top since then, but even today, its scale is just hard to wrap your head around.
The outside is iconic. We've all seen the pictures. But the real engineering genius continues deep inside. So, what secrets is it holding? Come on, let's take a look.
All right, so this was built way back around 2550 BCE, and the architects, they weren't dumb. They knew people would try to rob the treasures inside. So they designed all these complex internal passages and tried to seal the entrances with these massive stone plugs. But, as history tells us, over the centuries, nearly all those defenses were eventually broken.
The inside is just an absolute marvel of engineering. You've got the long, soaring, grand gallery that leads up to the king's chamber, which is placed with incredible precision right near the pyramid's center. Then there's the so-called Queen's Chamber below it, which might have been a backup tomb. And then, deep underground, there's this mysterious, unfinished chamber that we still don't really know the purpose of. I mean, just imagine building all of this with the tools they had back then. It's insane.
Okay, let's jump forward a few thousand years. The pharaohs are long gone, but the river story, it is far from over. Today, it's still a vital, modern artery for millions and millions of people.
And this number is just wild. Even today, a staggering 95% of all Egyptians live right along the banks of the Nile. The country's entire population is basically clustered in that thin, green, fertile ribbon. The river's pull is just as strong as it ever was.
But in 1970, that ancient, predictable rhythm that had defined life for millennia, it was changed forever. The construction of the Aswan High Dam was this huge, modern attempt to finally tame the river and harness its power for the 20th century.
And this created a massive trade-off, a real double-edged sword. On one hand, the dam did exactly what it was supposed to do. It stopped the floods, it allowed for year-round farming, and it generated a ton of electricity. But there was a huge cost. That life-giving silt, the stuff that had naturally fertilized the land for thousands of years, was now trapped behind the dam. The farmland was essentially being starved.
And its role in generating power has also shifted dramatically. When the dam was new, it supplied almost half of all of Egypt's electricity. Pretty amazing. But today, that number has plummeted to just about 5%. So what gives?
Well, the river is now facing this perfect storm of modern problems. You have climate change, which is reducing the amount of water flowing from the sources. At the same time, countries upstream, like Ethiopia, are building their own huge dams. The hard truth is that the gift of the Nile isn't infinite anymore. It's become a scarce resource that nations are now competing for. And all of this brings us to the big, critical question for today. For thousands of years, the Nile was this reliable, creative force. Now, its future is, well, it's uncertain. So the river that gave birth to one of the greatest civilizations ever, can it sustain the millions who depend on it today? The gift, it seems, has become a test.